In Clearwater Springs, North Carolina, 16-year-old Jordan Ellis sat in a courtroom dressed in an orange jumpsuit, a picture of youthful defiance. He maintained a cocky demeanor, making it clear that, to him, this trial was not about justice, it was about putting on a performance. Claiming he was asleep when his mother's boyfriend was brutally murdered, Jordan believed the absence of witnesses and the lack of a weapon made his case airtight. But one piece of evidence would change everything. A single video. A clear 4,000 pixel clip from a neighbor's Ring camera showed Jordan in chilling detail walking out of his house at 11:47 in the evening, stabbing the victim 8 times, and then calmly washing his hands with a garden hose. The prosecution held this crucial moment for the right time. By then, Jordan's performance would have unraveled, and the judge's condemnation would seal his fate. The morning air hung heavy with anticipation as citizens filed into the county courthouse. News vans lined the street outside, their satellite dishes pointed skyward. Inside courtroom 3, wooden benches filled with spectators eager to witness what had become the most talked-about case in the town's history. The victim, Marcus Hendricks, had been a well-known contractor who had helped rebuild homes after the devastating floods 2 years prior. His death had shaken the community. And now, the accused killer sat at the defense table with theatrical indifference. Jordan Ellis wore his orange jumpsuit like a costume. His dark hair had been slicked back, and despite the gravity of the situation, he sat with his shoulders squared and his chin lifted. He appeared to believe himself the star of some television drama, rather than a defendant facing second-degree murder charges. His attorney, a weary-looking public defender named Gerald Foster, sat beside him with a stack of folders and a troubled expression. Foster had tried speaking with Jordan about courtroom decorum multiple times, but the boy seemed incapable of understanding the severity of his circumstances. Judge Patricia Whitmore entered the courtroom with her black robes billowing behind her. She was a woman in her early 60s with steel gray hair pulled into a tight bun and eyes that missed nothing. She had presided over countless cases in her 23 years on the bench, but something about this one unsettled her. Perhaps it was the defendant's youth. Perhaps it was his disturbing lack of remorse. She settled into her chair and surveyed the courtroom before speaking. The bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Whitmore addressed the room. She explained the nature of the proceedings and asked Jordan Ellis to rise for his formal arraignment. Jordan stood slowly, almost lazily, and Foster had to nudge him to stand up straighter. The judge read the charges. Second-degree murder and the death of Marcus Hendricks, occurring on the night of August 14th in the defendant's home. How did the defendant plead? Jordan leaned toward the microphone with an unsettling smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Not guilty," he said, his voice carrying a note of amusement that made several jurors exchange uncomfortable glances. Foster closed his eyes briefly, knowing that his client's attitude was already poisoning any chance of sympathy. Judge Whitmore's expression remained neutral, but her knuckles whitened slightly as she gripped her gavel. The prosecution was led by District Attorney Rachel Montenegro, a sharp woman in her 40s with a reputation for meticulous case preparation. She stood to present the basic facts of the case. On August 14th at approximately 11:45 in the evening, Marcus Hendricks had been found dead in the driveway of the Ellis residence. He had suffered multiple stab wounds to his chest and abdomen. The murder weapon had not been recovered. There were no witnesses who had come forward. The defendant claimed he had been asleep in his bedroom during the time of the murder. Jordan nodded along as Montenegro spoke, as if agreeing with a weather report rather than listening to accusations of murder. He glanced toward the jury box periodically, seeming to gauge their reactions, adjusting his posture to appear more sympathetic. It was a performance. Montenegro continued, explaining that the investigation had revealed no signs of forced entry, no evidence of robbery, and no indication that anyone other than the household members had been present. She paused, then added that the state had recently obtained new evidence that would prove beyond any reasonable doubt that Jordan Ellis had murdered Marcus Hendricks in cold blood. Foster objected immediately, arguing that the prosecution was prejudicing the jury with speculation. Judge Whitmore sustained the objection, but the seed had been planted. Montenegro smiled slightly and sat down. The judge set a trial date and dismissed the court. As Jordan was led away by bailiffs, he turned back to look at the gallery, offering a small wave to his mother who sat weeping in the front row. It was a gesture designed to appear loving, but there was something hollow about it, something calculated. Detective John Harris, the lead investigator, had spent countless hours reviewing every detail of the crime scene. Harris was a veteran of the Clearwater Springs Police Department, a man in his 50s with gray stubble and tired eyes. He had been first on the scene that night, and something had bothered him from the beginning. The way Jordan had been standing there, too calm, too composed. The way he had answered questions without hesitation, almost as if he had rehearsed his responses. Harris believed in trusting his instincts, and his instincts screamed that Jordan Ellis was guilty. Harris returned to the scene multiple times, walking through the sequence of events. The Ellis home was a modest two-story structure on the edge of town, with a gravel driveway and a small front yard. Marcus Hendricks had been found near his truck. The blood evidence indicated he had been attacked there, but there was also a blood trail leading from the house to the truck. If Jordan had been inside sleeping, how did blood get tracked from inside the house? Harris had documented everything meticulously. The crime scene photos were disturbing. Marcus Hendricks had been stabbed 8 times. The wounds were vicious, driven by rage. This was not a random attack. This was personal. The medical examiner had determined that the wounds were consistent with a kitchen knife, approximately 6 inches in length. A search of the Ellis kitchen revealed that one knife was missing from the block. Jordan's explanation was that the knife had been missing for weeks, possibly thrown away. Convenient, Harris had thought. Harris interviewed neighbors extensively. Most reported hearing nothing unusual that night. But one neighbor, an elderly woman named Patricia Crawford, mentioned something interesting. She said her Ring doorbell camera had picked up motion alerts around 11:45 that night. Harris had obtained the footage immediately, and what he saw had changed everything. He had taken the video directly to Montenegro, and together they had decided to hold it back until the perfect moment at trial. It would be their smoking gun. The trial began on a crisp October morning. The courtroom was packed with spectators, journalists, and members of the victim's family. Marcus Hendricks had 2 adult children from a previous marriage, a son named Derek and a daughter named Alicia. Both sat in the front row, their faces etched with grief and anger. Jordan entered the courtroom with the same cocky swagger, nodding to his mother as if he were arriving at a school event. Judge Whitmore called the court to order and reminded everyone of the seriousness of the proceedings. She addressed the jury, explaining their role and the burden of proof required for a conviction. Then she invited the prosecution to present its opening statement. Montenegro stood and approached the jury box with measured steps. She spoke clearly, outlining the state's case. She described Marcus Hendricks as a hard-working man who had tried to build a life with Jordan's mother, Sarah Ellis. She explained that Jordan had resented Marcus from the beginning, viewing him as an intruder. She detailed the escalating tensions in the household, the arguments, the threats Jordan had made. And she promised that the evidence would show that on the night of August 14th, Jordan Ellis had murdered Marcus Hendricks in cold blood. Foster's opening statement was defensive. He portrayed Jordan as a troubled teenager struggling with his parents' divorce and his mother's new relationship. He argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that there was no weapon, no witnesses, and no conclusive proof. He emphasized Jordan's youth and asked the jury not to rush to judgment. As Foster spoke, Jordan sat perfectly still, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes darted to the jury members, trying to read their reactions. The prosecution called its first witness, Sarah Ellis, Jordan's mother. She took the stand reluctantly, her hands trembling as she was sworn in. Montenegro approached gently. Sarah described her relationship with Marcus, how they had met 2 years after her divorce, how he had been kind and patient. But she admitted that Jordan had never accepted Marcus. There had been constant arguments. Jordan had accused Marcus of trying to control him. Things had escalated in the weeks before the murder. Jordan had threatened to make Marcus leave. On the night of the murder, Sarah had been working the late shift at the hospital where she was a nurse. She had arrived home just after midnight to find police cars in her driveway, and Marcus lying dead on the ground. Jordan had been sitting on the front porch, wrapped in a blanket, telling officers he had been asleep. Sarah broke down on the stand, sobbing that she could not believe her son could do such a thing. But Montenegro pressed gently. Had Jordan ever been violent before? Sarah hesitated, then admitted that Jordan had punched a wall during an argument with Marcus the previous month. Had Jordan ever threatened Marcus directly? Yes, she whispered. He had told Marcus that he wished he would disappear forever. Foster cross-examined Sarah, trying to establish that Jordan's statements were typical teenage hyperbole. He pointed out that Sarah had never feared for Marcus's safety. But the damage was done. The jury had seen a mother torn between her son and the truth. As Sarah stepped down, she looked at Jordan with anguished eyes. He met her gaze briefly, then looked away. The prosecution next called Mrs. Patricia Crawford, the neighbor with the Ring doorbell camera. She was a woman in her 70s with white hair and a gentle demeanor. She explained that she lived directly across from the Ellis residence and that her security system had recorded motion alerts on the night of the murder. Montenegro thanked her and moved on, deliberately not asking about the footage itself. This was part of the strategy. Let the defense think they knew everything. The real evidence would come later. Foster declined to cross-examine Mrs. Crawford, seeing no threat in her testimony. Jordan leaned back in his chair, visibly relaxed. He believed the prosecution had nothing. A motion alert meant nothing without footage showing him committing the crime. He whispered to Foster that this was going well. Foster did not respond, his attention focused on his notes. He had a bad feeling about this case, a sense that Montenegro was holding back something significant. The next witness was a psychologist named Dr. Amanda Reeves, whom the defense had hired to evaluate Jordan. This was Foster's attempt to humanize his client. Dr. Reeves testified that she had conducted several sessions with Jordan and found him to be dealing with significant emotional trauma from his parents' divorce. She described him as having difficulty processing his feelings, which manifested as anger and defiance. She explained that his lack of visible grief could be consistent with shock rather than guilt. Montenegro's cross-examination was surgical. She asked Dr. Reeves if narcissistic personality traits could also explain a lack of empathy and remorse. The doctor admitted that was possible. Montenegro asked if someone with narcissistic traits might view a traumatic event as a performance opportunity. Again, the doctor conceded this was within the realm of possibility. Montenegro asked if the doctor had been present on the night of the murder. No, of course not. So her testimony was based solely on sessions conducted weeks after the event, sessions where Jordan knew he was being evaluated. Yes, Dr. Reeves admitted reluctantly. The defense's psychological angle had been neutralized. As the trial progressed into its second week, Detective Harris took the stand. His testimony was critical to establishing the physical evidence. He walked the jury through the crime scene investigation, describing the position of the body, the pattern of blood evidence, and the lack of any signs indicating an external intruder. He explained that he had conducted a thorough search of the property and found a second blood trail that led from the back door of the house to the driveway. This contradicted Jordan's claim that he had been asleep inside. Montenegro displayed crime scene photographs on large screens for the jury. The images were graphic. Several jurors looked away, visibly disturbed. Jordan maintained his composure, but his jaw tightened. Harris continued, explaining that blood evidence had been found on a shirt recovered from Jordan's bedroom. The shirt had been wadded up and stuffed into the back of Jordan's closet. Deoxyribonucleic acid testing had confirmed the blood belonged to Marcus Hendricks. Jordan had claimed he never touched the body, that he had called for his mother immediately upon finding Marcus. Foster's cross-examination focused on the missing murder weapon. If Jordan had committed this crime, where was the knife? Harris acknowledged that the weapon had not been found, but explained that it was not uncommon for perpetrators to dispose of evidence. Foster seized on this, suggesting that the real killer could have taken the weapon when they fled. Harris remained calm, stating that all evidence pointed to Jordan and no one else. The prosecution also introduced text messages between Jordan and his friend discussing how much he hated Marcus. In one exchange from 3 weeks before the murder, Jordan had written that Marcus needed to disappear, that he was ruining everything. The friend had responded asking if Jordan was serious, and Jordan had replied that he was dead serious. The prosecution argued this established premeditation. The defense countered that these were the angry rants of a frustrated teenager, but combined with the other evidence, the messages painted a disturbing picture. As the third week of trial began, the prosecution called a forensic expert named Dr. Michael Chen, a blood spatter analyst with over 20 years of experience. He had examined the crime scene photographs and the physical evidence extensively. His testimony was technical, walking the jury through the science of blood spatter analysis. He explained that the pattern of blood on Jordan's shirt was consistent with high-velocity impact spatter, the kind produced when a sharp object punctures the body. This was not consistent with blood transfer from touching a body. This was consistent with being present during the actual stabbing. Dr. Chen also testified about the blood trail from the house. The pattern suggested someone had walked from inside the house to the driveway, with blood dripping from their hands or clothing. The stride pattern indicated an unhurried pace. Whoever had left that trail had not been running or panicking. They had walked calmly. The evidence suggested the killer had been composed, controlled. Foster challenged the blood evidence, bringing up debates within the field about blood spatter reliability. Dr. Chen acknowledged the debates, but stood by his analysis. He had been doing this work for 2 decades and was confident in his conclusions. The blood evidence pointed to Jordan Ellis as the killer. The prosecution then introduced a witness who had not been disclosed until late in discovery. His name was Trevor Michaels, a 17-year-old who had been friends with Jordan since middle school. Trevor took the stand nervously, avoiding eye contact with Jordan. Montenegro asked Trevor to describe his relationship with Jordan. They had been close friends, Trevor said, but had drifted apart in recent months. Why? Trevor hesitated, then explained that Jordan had become increasingly dark and obsessed with getting rid of Marcus. Trevor testified that 2 days before the murder, Jordan had asked him a strange question. Jordan had wanted to know if Trevor thought someone could get away with murder if they were smart about it, if they planned it carefully. Trevor had laughed it off, thinking Jordan was just being dramatic. But now, sitting in the courtroom, Trevor realized that Jordan had been serious. Jordan had been planning something. Montenegro asked if Jordan had ever discussed specific ways to commit murder. Trevor said yes. Jordan had talked about making it look like a robbery or an accident. He had even joked about using a knife because it was quieter than a gun. Foster's cross-examination was aggressive. He accused Trevor of fabricating his testimony to get attention. Trevor denied this, insisting he was telling the truth. Foster pointed out that Trevor had not come forward immediately after the murder. Trevor explained that he had been scared, that he had not wanted to believe his friend could really kill someone. But the more he thought about their conversations, the more disturbed he became. He had gone to his parents, and they had insisted he speak with Detective Harris. Jordan's facade was crumbling. When Trevor had entered the courtroom, Jordan's face had gone pale. As Trevor testified, Jordan shook his head repeatedly, mouthing the word no. Foster had to physically restrain him from standing up. During a recess, Jordan exploded at his attorney, insisting that Trevor was lying. Foster explained that they could challenge Trevor's testimony, but that attacking him too aggressively could backfire. Jordan did not care. He wanted Trevor exposed as a liar. But Foster knew the damage was done. The jury had seen a former friend bravely testifying despite obvious fear. The next witness was another forensic expert specializing in deoxyribonucleic acid evidence. Dr. Lisa Nguyen had conducted the deoxyribonucleic acid analysis on the blood found on Jordan's shirt and at the crime scene. She explained the testing process in detail. The blood on Jordan's shirt matched Marcus Hendricks with a probability of 1 in several billion. There was no doubt about the source. Dr. Nguyen also testified that skin cells found under Marcus Hendricks's fingernails had been tested. The victim had fought back, scratching his attacker. The deoxyribonucleic acid under those fingernails matched Jordan Ellis. This evidence was devastating. Foster tried to argue that the deoxyribonucleic acid could have been transferred innocently through normal household contact, but Dr. Nguyen explained that finding skin cells under the victim's fingernails suggested a struggle. The pattern of scratches on Jordan's arms, documented by police on the night of the murder, were consistent with defensive wounds. Jordan had claimed the scratches were from playing basketball, but there were no basketball courts near his home, and none of his friends could corroborate that story. As the prosecution neared the end of its case, Montenegro stood and addressed the judge. She explained that the state had one final piece of evidence, the most critical piece, that would conclusively prove Jordan Ellis's guilt. She requested permission to introduce video footage obtained from a neighbor's home security system. Foster immediately objected, arguing that the defense had not been given adequate time to review this evidence. Judge Whitmore reviewed the discovery timeline and noted that the footage had been provided to the defense 2 weeks prior, which met legal requirements. Foster's objection was overruled. Montenegro announced that the state would present this evidence the following day. That evening, Foster watched the ring camera footage in his office. What he saw made his stomach drop. The video was crystal clear, shot in high definition with excellent night vision capability. It showed the front of the Ellis house and part of the driveway. At 11:47 in the evening, the timestamp read, a figure emerged from the front door. The figure was clearly identifiable as Jordan Ellis. In his right hand, he held what appeared to be a kitchen knife. Jordan walked calmly down the porch steps and approached Marcus Hendrick's truck. Marcus was visible in the frame, standing near the driver's side door. The video had audio. Marcus said something that sounded like he was asking Jordan what he was doing outside. Jordan did not respond verbally. Instead, he moved quickly, closing the distance. What happened next was brutal and clear. Jordan raised the knife and plunged it into Marcus's chest. Marcus staggered backward, raising his hands defensively. Jordan struck again, and again, and again. 8 times in total, each strike visible and unmistakable. Marcus collapsed to the ground. Then Jordan did something chilling. He walked to the side of the house where a garden hose was coiled. He turned on the water and calmly washed his hands, rinsing away the blood. He even splashed water on his shirt. The entire sequence lasted less than 3 minutes. When he was finished, Jordan looked around, seemed to check that no one was watching, then walked back into the house. The video continued recording until Sarah Ellis's car pulled in, and her screams filled the audio. Foster sat in stunned silence. He had defended many guilty clients in his career, but he had never seen evidence this damning. There was no way to challenge this, no way to explain it away. Jordan Ellis had murdered Marcus Hendricks in cold blood, and it was all captured on video. Foster knew he had to speak with his client, had to prepare him for what was coming. The performance was over. The next morning, the courtroom was unusually quiet. Word had spread that something significant was about to happen. The gallery was packed. Jordan entered with his usual swagger, but Foster noticed the boy's hands trembling. Foster had told Jordan about the video during a brief conference that morning. Jordan's reaction had been denial, insisting the video must be fake. Foster had explained that the video had been authenticated by multiple experts. Jordan had sat in silence for a long time, then asked if Foster could make a deal. Foster had replied that it was too late. The prosecution had overwhelming evidence. Judge Whitmore called the court to order. Montenegro stood and announced that the state would now present its final exhibit, video footage from a security camera. The lights in the courtroom were dimmed, and a large screen was positioned so everyone could see clearly. Montenegro narrated as the video began to play, pointing out key details: the timestamp, the clear view of Jordan Ellis, the knife, the attack, the methodical washing of his hands. As the video played, the courtroom was silent except for the sounds from the recording. Marcus's voice, the thuds of the knife striking flesh, Marcus's gasps, Sarah's eventual screams. When the video ended, the lights came back on. Several jurors had tears in their eyes. Others looked nauseated. The defense attorney slouched in his chair, defeat written across his features. And Jordan Ellis sat frozen, his face drained of all color. His hands gripped the edge of the defense table so tightly his knuckles were white. The arrogant smirk was gone. The confident posture had collapsed. For the first time, Jordan looked like what he was: a frightened boy who had done something monstrous and was now facing the full weight of his actions. Montenegro let the silence hang, allowing the impact of the evidence to sink in. Then she addressed the jury. She explained that the video had been recovered from Mrs. Crawford's Ring doorbell system, that it had been authenticated by digital forensics experts, that the timestamp had been verified. There was no possibility of manipulation, no possibility of misidentification. The video showed exactly what it appeared to show: Jordan Ellis murdering Marcus Hendricks in cold blood. Foster had no cross-examination to offer. What could he say? Judge Whitmore asked if the defense wished to present any witnesses. Foster stood slowly and stated that the defense rested. There was no point in calling witnesses now. The judge announced that closing arguments would begin the following morning. As the bailiffs approached to escort Jordan back to holding, he suddenly lunged forward, trying to reach the prosecutor's table. He was shouting that the video was fake, that someone had set him up. The bailiffs grabbed him, pulling him back. Foster tried to calm him, but Jordan was beyond reason. His carefully constructed performance had disintegrated entirely. As he was dragged from the courtroom, his mother sobbed in the front row. The closing arguments began the next morning. Foster spoke first. His closing was brief and half-hearted. He argued that the jury should consider Jordan's age, his troubled home life, and the possibility that the video did not show the full context. Perhaps Marcus had threatened Jordan in some way not captured on camera. But even Foster could hear how weak his argument sounded. He concluded by asking the jury to carefully consider all the evidence. He sat down, looking exhausted. Montenegro's closing argument was powerful and methodical. She walked the jury through the entire case, piece by piece. The motive established through text messages and witness testimony showing Jordan's hatred for Marcus. The opportunity Jordan had while his mother was at work. The physical evidence, including the blood on Jordan's clothing and the deoxyribonucleic acid under the victim's fingernails. The timeline that contradicted Jordan's alibi. And most importantly, the video evidence that removed all doubt. She played key segments of the video again, narrating Jordan's actions, the calm approach, the vicious attack, the cold-blooded cleanup. Montenegro addressed the jury directly. She told them that Jordan Ellis had committed first-degree murder, not second-degree as originally charged. The video showed premeditation. Jordan had armed himself with a knife before going outside. He had known what he intended to do. She acknowledged that judging a 16-year-old was difficult, but she reminded them that Marcus Hendricks had been a human being who deserved to live, who had people who loved him. The evidence does not lie, she said. The video does not lie. Jordan Ellis murdered Marcus Hendricks, and he must be held accountable. Judge Whitmore instructed the jury on the law, explaining the elements of murder, the burden of proof, and their duties. Then she sent them to deliberate. Everyone knew it would not take long. 3 hours later, the jury returned with a verdict. Jordan was brought back into the courtroom, his orange jumpsuit wrinkled, his face blotchy from crying. He could barely stand without Foster supporting him. Judge Whitmore asked the foreperson to announce the verdict. The foreperson stood and read from the verdict form. On the charge of first-degree murder, they found the defendant, Jordan Ellis, guilty. A collective exhale moved through the courtroom. Sarah Ellis collapsed in her seat, wailing. Derek and Alicia Hendricks embraced, tears streaming down their faces. Jordan stood motionless, staring at the jury box with absolute disbelief. Judge Whitmore thanked the jury and scheduled the sentencing hearing for 2 weeks later. She explained that victim impact statements would be heard at that time. As the court adjourned, Jordan was led away. He moved like a sleepwalker, all the fight drained out of him. The 2 weeks before sentencing were agonizing for everyone involved. Foster met with Jordan multiple times in the sterile visiting rooms of the detention center, trying to prepare him for what was coming. The meetings were difficult. Jordan oscillated between denial and despair, sometimes within the same conversation. He would start by insisting that the jury had made a mistake, that there must be grounds for appeal, that somehow this nightmare would end. Then reality would crash down on him, and he would break down completely, sobbing uncontrollably, his face buried in his hands. Foster tried to explain the sentencing guidelines for juveniles convicted of first-degree murder, walking Jordan through the legal framework, the Supreme Court precedents, the factors the judge would consider. But Jordan seemed incapable of processing the information. His mind rejected what his ears were hearing. During one particularly difficult meeting, Jordan asked Foster if he thought the judge would show mercy because of his age. Foster had been honest. The video evidence had been too damning, he explained. The premeditation too clear. The lack of remorse too obvious. Jordan had started hyperventilating, gasping for air, and Foster had to call for medical assistance. A nurse came and helped Jordan calm down, but the incident showed just how fragile the boy's mental state had become. The arrogant teenager who had walked into court weeks earlier had been completely shattered. Sarah Ellis visited her son in jail as often as regulations allowed. The visits took place in a small room divided by thick plexiglass, communication happening through phones mounted on the wall. The visits were heartbreaking. Sarah would arrive with red, swollen eyes, having cried the entire drive to the facility. She would pick up the phone with shaking hands and try to speak to her son, try to understand what had happened to the little boy she had raised. She asked him repeatedly why he had done it, what had driven him to such violence. Jordan had no answer that made sense. He mumbled apologies that sounded hollow even to his own ears. He said he did not know what had come over him, claimed he wished he could take it back, insisted that he never meant for things to go so far. But Sarah could see through the words. A mother knows her child, knows when they are being truthful and when they are performing. And what she saw in Jordan's eyes was not genuine remorse for killing Marcus. It was regret for being caught, fear of punishment, anger at the system for not believing his lies. Her son was sorry that his life had been ruined, but he showed no real understanding of the life he had taken. This realization was devastating for Sarah. She had given birth to this person, had loved him unconditionally, had sacrificed for him, had believed in him even when others doubted. And now she had to accept that he was capable of murder, that he had planned and executed the killing of a man she had loved. The guilt was crushing. What had she done wrong? What signs had she missed? Could she have prevented this? The victim's family also spent those 2 weeks preparing for the sentencing hearing. Derek Hendricks took time off from his job in Charlotte to stay in Clearwater Springs with his sister. They stayed in their father's house, surrounded by his belongings, his photographs, the physical reminders of a life cut short. Derek worked on his victim impact statement late into the night, writing and rewriting, trying to capture who his father had been and what his loss meant. He described fishing trips on Lake Norman when he was 8 years old, his father's patience as he taught Derek to cast a line. He wrote about his father attending every one of his high school football games, cheering from the stands. He documented the phone calls they had shared every Sunday, conversations about work and life and family. He included details about his father's business, the homes he had built, the families he had helped after the floods devastated the area. Derek's 10-page letter was both a tribute and an accusation. It painted a picture of a man who had contributed to his community, who had loved his children, who had tried to build a future with Sarah Ellis despite the challenges Jordan presented. And it made clear that all of that had been stolen by a teenager who cared only about himself. Derek showed the letter to his sister, and Alicia added her own memories. Their father teaching her to ride a bike, their father walking her down the aisle at her wedding, their father's excitement when she told him she was pregnant with his first grandchild, a grandchild he would now never meet. Alicia worked with a therapist to process her grief and rage. The sessions were difficult. She had nightmares about the video footage, seeing her father's final moments over and over. She woke up screaming. Her husband tried to comfort her, but nothing helped. The therapist explained that this was normal grief compounded by trauma, that witnessing such violence against someone you love creates deep psychological wounds. The therapist helped Alicia craft her victim impact statement, finding words to express emotions that felt too large for language. Alicia wanted to make Jordan understand what he had taken, not just a life, but a presence, a voice, a source of love and guidance. She wanted him to feel even a fraction of the pain his actions had caused. Montenegro also prepared extensively for the sentencing hearing. She knew that her role was not just to argue for a specific sentence, but to ensure that Marcus Hendricks was remembered as a person, not just a victim. She reviewed all the evidence again, made notes on the most powerful moments from the trial, and prepared her recommendations for the judge. She met with Derek and Alicia multiple times, helping them refine their statements, advising them on what would be most effective. She explained that victim impact statements were not just about expressing grief, but about helping the judge understand the full scope of the harm caused by the crime. The day of sentencing arrived. The courtroom was once again packed. Jordan entered looking smaller somehow, diminished. He wore civilian clothes for the first time since his arrest, a button-down shirt and slacks his mother had brought, but the clothes hung loosely on his frame. He had lost weight. His eyes were hollow. Foster sat beside him, a hand on the boy's shoulder, providing what little comfort he could. Judge Whitmore called the court to order and announced that they were proceeding to sentencing. She first invited the victim's family to present their impact statements. Derek Hendricks walked to the podium with shaking hands. He looked at Jordan directly, his eyes burning with grief and anger. He spoke about his father, about the man Marcus had been. A devoted father, a skilled craftsman, a generous friend, someone who had helped rebuild this community after disaster. Derek described specific memories, fishing trips when he was a child, his father teaching him to use tools, the pride in Marcus's eyes at Derek's college graduation. Derek's voice cracked as he described learning of his father's death, the phone call from police, the drive to Clearwater Springs, seeing his father's body at the morgue. He turned to Jordan and said that he would never understand how Jordan could do what he did, how a 16-year-old could plan and execute such a vicious murder. He said that Marcus had only wanted to be a positive presence in Jordan's life, and Jordan had repaid that kindness with violence. Derek concluded by asking the judge to impose the maximum sentence allowable to ensure that Jordan Ellis never had the opportunity to hurt anyone else. Alicia Hendricks spoke next. Her statement was more emotional. She talked about the last time she had seen her father alive, a Sunday dinner just a week before the murder. He had been happy, excited about his relationship with Sarah, optimistic that things with Jordan would improve. Alicia's voice broke as she said that her father had been wrong, that his optimism had been misplaced. She described the nightmares she had been having since seeing the video evidence. She told Jordan that he had not just killed one person, but had destroyed their entire family. She asked the judge to consider the lifelong pain Jordan had inflicted on everyone who loved Marcus. When Alicia finished, she returned to her seat and buried her face in her brother's shoulder, sobbing. The courtroom felt heavy with grief. Judge Whitmore allowed a moment for everyone to compose themselves before asking if the defense wished to present any mitigating evidence. Foster stood and called Sarah Ellis to the stand. Sarah testified tearfully about Jordan's childhood, about the trauma of the divorce, about her own guilt for not recognizing how deeply troubled her son had become. She begged the judge for mercy, arguing that Jordan was still just a child who had made a terrible mistake. But even as she spoke, her words sounded hollow. Everyone had seen the video. Foster also presented letters from Jordan's teachers and a school counselor, describing him as an intelligent student who had struggled with behavioral issues, but who they believed could be rehabilitated. Montenegro did not cross-examine any of the defense witnesses. The victim impact statements had already made her case. She simply reiterated that the severity of the crime and Jordan's complete lack of genuine remorse warranted the maximum sentence. Finally, Judge Whitmore asked Jordan if he wished to make a statement before sentencing. Foster advised him to keep it brief and to express remorse. Jordan stood slowly and approached the podium. His hands shook as he gripped the edges. He looked down at a piece of paper he had prepared, but when he tried to speak, the words would not come. He started to cry, his shoulders shaking. After a long moment, he managed to say he was sorry. He said he wished he could take it back. He said he did not know why he had done it, but the words felt empty, rehearsed. He returned to his seat without finishing his statement. Judge Whitmore sat back in her chair, her hands folded in front of her. She had been reviewing her notes throughout the victim statements, and now she looked directly at Jordan. When she began to speak, her voice carried a weight that silenced the entire courtroom. She said that in her 23 years on the bench, she had presided over many difficult cases, but few had affected her as deeply as this one. The murder of Marcus Hendricks was a tragedy, not just for his family, but for the entire community. A good man had been taken from this world by senseless violence, and the person responsible was sitting before her, a 16-year-old boy who had shown throughout this entire process that he lacked basic empathy and remorse. Judge Whitmore addressed Jordan directly, her eyes never leaving his face. She said she had watched him carefully throughout the trial, had observed his behavior, his expressions, his interactions. She said what she had witnessed was not a traumatized teenager who had made a terrible mistake in a moment of passion. What she had witnessed was a calculated performance. Jordan had entered her courtroom believing he was untouchable, believing that his youth would shield him from consequences, believing that he could charm and manipulate his way through the system. He had smirked and postured and acted as though the proceedings were beneath him. He had treated the trial like theater, playing the role of the innocent accused. But the video evidence had stripped away that performance, Judge Whitmore continued. It had revealed the truth in a way that could not be denied or manipulated. The video showed Jordan Ellis as he truly was. Not a frightened child acting in self-defense, not a troubled teenager who lost control in a moment of rage, but a cold, calculated killer who armed himself with a weapon, approached his victim and murdered him in cold blood. And then, most chillingly, Jordan had calmly washed the blood from his hands as if he had just completed a chore. There was no panic, no remorse, no recognition of the enormity of what he had done, just cold efficiency. Judge Whitmore said that what made this case particularly disturbing was the premeditated nature of the crime. The evidence showed that Jordan had thought about this, had planned it, had discussed it with friends. He had not stumbled into violence. He had chosen it deliberately. He had decided that Marcus Hendricks's life was worth less than his own convenience, his own desire to have his mother to himself. And he had acted on that decision with brutal efficiency. 8 stab wounds, each one a choice, each one a moment where Jordan could have stopped, but did not. The judge addressed the defense's arguments about Jordan's youth and potential for rehabilitation. She acknowledged that the brain of a 16-year-old was not fully developed, that adolescents were more impulsive than adults, but she said that this case went beyond typical adolescent impulsivity. The planning, the execution, the cleanup, and most importantly, the complete absence of genuine remorse even after being caught and convicted, all pointed to someone who posed an ongoing danger to society. She said that rehabilitation required a willingness to acknowledge wrongdoing, to genuinely feel remorse, and to commit to change. Jordan had shown none of those qualities. Judge Whitmore then addressed the impact on the victims. She said that when we talk about the victims of murder, we must remember that it is not just the person who died, but everyone who loved them. Marcus Hendricks had children who would never again hear his voice, never receive his advice, never feel his embrace. He had friends who had lost a companion. He had a community that had lost a valuable member. And all of that loss, all of that pain, could be traced directly to the actions of one selfish, arrogant teenager who believed he was above the law. The judge explained that under North Carolina law, juveniles convicted of first-degree murder could not receive the death penalty. They could receive life sentences, but recent Supreme Court decisions had placed restrictions on such sentences, requiring judges to consider the unique circumstances of juvenile offenders. She had reviewed those decisions carefully, had considered all the mitigating factors presented by the defense, had weighed Jordan's age and background against the severity of his crime, and she had come to a decision. Judge Whitmore said that while she recognized Jordan Ellis was 16 years old at the time of the murder, she could not ignore the calculated nature of his crime, the complete lack of remorse he had shown, and the ongoing danger he posed to society. She said that some crimes are so heinous, so devastating in their impact, that they warrant the most severe punishment available under the law. This was such a crime. The judge pronounced sentence. For the crime of first-degree murder, she sentenced Jordan Ellis to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The words echoed through the courtroom like thunder. Sarah Ellis let out a wail, collapsing into sobs. Derek and Alicia Hendricks embraced, tears of relief streaming down their faces. Jordan sat frozen, his face blank, as if he could not process what had just been said. But Judge Whitmore was not finished. She said that she wanted Jordan to understand exactly what this sentence meant. It meant that he would spend the rest of his natural life behind bars. He would never go to college, never have a career, never marry, never have children, never experience the freedoms that other young people took for granted. Every birthday, every holiday, every milestone that should have been a celebration would instead be marked by the realization of what he had thrown away. She said that Jordan had had his entire life ahead of him, full of possibility and potential, and he had destroyed it all with a few minutes of violence born from arrogance and selfishness. The judge said that perhaps, in the decades to come, Jordan would find some measure of genuine remorse. Perhaps he would come to understand the magnitude of what he had done, the lives he had destroyed, the pain he had caused. She hoped that would be the case, because a life lived without growth or redemption was a wasted life. But regardless of whether Jordan ever found redemption, he would remain in prison. Society had a right to be protected from those who demonstrated such callous disregard for human life. Judge Whitmore concluded by addressing the victim's family. She told Derek and Alicia that no sentence could bring their father back. No punishment could undo the harm that had been done. But she hoped that knowing Jordan would never be free again provided some measure of closure, some sense that justice had been served. She praised their strength in enduring the trial and in fighting for their father's memory. She said that Marcus Hendricks had clearly been a remarkable man, and his loss was felt not just by his family, but by the entire community. With that, Judge Whitmore brought down her gavel. The sentence was final. Jordan Ellis was immediately remanded into custody. As the bailiffs approached him, he seemed to awaken from his stupor. He turned to his mother, reaching for her, calling out to her. Sarah tried to get to him, but court personnel held her back. Mother and son locked eyes across the courtroom, both of them crying, both of them devastated. Then Jordan was led away through the side door. The heavy door closed behind him with a sound of finality that seemed to echo through the entire courthouse. In the days that followed, the verdict and sentence became major news throughout North Carolina and began spreading to national media outlets. The case raised fundamental questions about juvenile justice, about whether adolescents who commit murder should be subject to life sentences without parole, about how the criminal justice system should balance accountability with the recognition that teenage brains are still developing. Legal experts appeared on television, dissecting every aspect of the case. The video evidence became a focal point of discussion. Some experts argued that such clear, irrefutable evidence made the case unique. Others suggested that the prevalence of home security cameras was changing the landscape of criminal justice. Social media exploded with opinions about the case. People debated the sentence and discussed broader issues of youth violence. A memorial page created by Derek and Alicia attracted thousands of followers who left condolences and shared memories of Marcus. School counselors across the state used the case as a teaching opportunity, discussing with students the real consequences of violence. In Clearwater Springs itself, the community struggled to process what had happened. The town had always prided itself on being safe. The murder had shattered that sense of security. Parents held their children closer, wondering what warning signs they might be missing. The local high school brought in grief counselors and held assemblies about conflict resolution and mental health resources. For the Hendricks family, the sentencing brought a bittersweet sense of closure. Derek returned to his job in Charlotte but found it difficult to focus. He established the Marcus Hendricks Memorial Scholarship Fund to provide financial assistance to students pursuing careers in the skilled trades. The scholarship was Derek's way of ensuring that his father's legacy of building and helping others would continue. Alicia gave birth to her daughter 4 months after the sentencing. She named the baby girl Marcella, after her father. It was a bittersweet moment, celebrating new life while mourning the grandfather who would never meet this child. Alicia set up a memory book for Marcella, filling it with photographs of Marcus and stories about his life. Both Derek and Alicia became advocates for victims' rights, speaking at conferences about the impact of violent crime on families. They argued for stronger victim impact statement procedures and for policies that ensured offenders were held accountable regardless of age. Their advocacy work gave them a sense of purpose, a way to channel their grief into something constructive. The video footage from Patricia Crawford's Ring camera had been the smoking gun that destroyed Jordan's defense and sealed his fate. The clarity of the recording, the irrefutable nature of the evidence, had left no room for doubt or manipulation. Jordan had believed he was smart enough to get away with murder, but he had not counted on a neighbor's security camera capturing his every move. The technology that was meant to make people feel safe had instead brought a killer to justice. As time passed, the case became a fixture in legal textbooks and criminal justice courses. The image of 16-year-old Jordan Ellis being led away in handcuffs, his head down, his arrogance finally extinguished, became iconic. It was a stark reminder that actions have consequences, that youth is not always an excuse, and that justice, when properly served, can be both merciful and severe. The legacy of Marcus Hendricks lived on through his family, through the scholarship fund established in his name, through the memories of those who had known and loved him. And the cautionary tale of Jordan Ellis served as a warning to others who might believe themselves above the law, untouchable, immune to consequences. The haunting image of him in his orange jumpsuit, walking away from everything he had known, remained the final reminder of what happens when performance meets reality, when lies meet evidence, and when arrogance meets justice.